Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. The long awaited Japanese guide is finally here. I have finished everything in this tree. Don't look at that truck there or that gun at the top. And we can finally talk about each tier that the Japanese have and the different squads and guns that you guys should be pushing for and setting yourself up with to win the most games. Now, a couple things before we begin. Of course, as always, remember to like, comment, and subscribe, yada, 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 all that YouTuber stuff. It does help me out, and I do appreciate it, guys. And the other important thing is that we're going to be, again, assuming that you are a free-to-play player. We're assuming that you only have 3 squad slots and a vehicle slot for each tier as we set things up. We're not going to be able to go super in-depth to each BR. We leave those for our individual BR guides, but we'll still be talking about each gun as best we can, or at least the best stuff in each tier of weapons. But without anything else, guys, let's jump into it talking about the kind of overview of Japan. Now, Japan is probably one of the more interesting factions in Enlisted, due largely in part to the fact that it only fights against the Americans, at least at the time of this video. We'll see if in the future they end up fighting the Soviets in some sort of Manchuria campaign. I believe that's where they fought, right? But at least right now, they only fight against the Allies on a handful of maps. So their gear is kind of tailor-made for those maps, which, you know, again, kind of ends up being a very interesting matchup. They don't have to worry about fighting against Soviet vehicles or anything like that, or Soviet infantry, the way that the Germans need to, because they don't do it. They only fight the Allies, right? And they actually line up pretty well against the Allies in terms of all of their weapons. Now, they don't have anything that I would consider to be best in slot, but they have probably like the second or third best gun in each type of weapon, right? In each class of weapon, right? MG, SMG, bolt action, so on and so forth. So overall, they end up having like a very well-rounded roster, one that is a lot more well-rounded than you'd think, and they've got a lot of tricks up their sleeve, as well as some additional tools that only they have access to, like katanas and the anti-tank lunge mine, which we'll talk about here in just a little bit. But to start out, guys, let's jump into Tier 1. Now, as we start off in Tier 1 for the Japanese, we're going to want to start off here with our Type 97 anti-tank rifle. We're going to research this as soon as possible because we're going to want an anti-tank weapon to be able to engage with enemy vehicles. Now, the Type 97 anti-tank rifle is actually hilarious. This thing is 45 armor pen, putting it on par with the PTRS, which is a Tier 2 anti-tank weapon, which means that this thing is actually really, really solid. It has 7 rounds in a magazine and a pretty good rate of fire to boot. So this thing is very solid against anything that the Allies are going to throw at you. You can definitely take out lots and lots of vehicles, which you're going to need to, because the tanks and the planes, the early vehicles and things like that for the Japanese are woefully underpowered. So we're definitely going to want to get our anti-tank weapon as soon as possible. Now, after we've unlocked that, we're going to want to come up and probably start researching up to get our engineer squad. The engineer squad, engineers at the Type I. We're going to want to grab the Type I rifle because this engineer squad, our engineer squad is obviously really, really strong. The engineer squad is going to let us build anti-tank guns, anti-air guns, fortifications, rally points, things like that. And it's going to also be a solid squad to be using with the Arisaka Type 38 rifle, which is arguably the best bolt-action rifle in all of Enlisted, beat out by only, in my opinion, the Mannlicher, which is a BR2 gun anyway. So this thing is going to be able to take on anything that the Allies toss at you, and you're going to be pretty happy using it. Now, for your second slot, you're going to want to definitely bring a S100 squad. You're going to want to have this medic squad here. You can bring the Type 100 SMG. It's kind of a personal preference. I personally like the S100 more than I like the Type 100, simply because I like the open sights that the S100 has, as opposed to the closed sights of the Type 100. But you're going to want to level up and acquire the Type 100 anyway. So this just comes down to personal preference. Try them both out, see what you like more. And stick with those. So we're going to have a medic squad, we're going to have an engineer squad, and then our final squad is up to you. You are able to, of course, bring an anti-tank squad. I see no reason not to. They're very strong. The Type 97 anti-tank rifle is solid. You can also just bring a sniper squad if you want, or an infantry squad if you want. all of which are good options. Like I mentioned, the Type 38 is a solid gun, and bringing a 9-man squad of infantry using that is not a bad choice at all. Now, in Tier 1 for our planes or tanks, we don't really have anything that's worth using, in my opinion. Like, I guess the best of them is probably the Kami, but this thing really isn't good. Like, or I guess the Ha-Go might be slightly better. None of them are really good. I'll just tell you guys that straight up. None of the Japanese tanks are very good. The Japanese planes really aren't that much better. You can see just a 60 kg bomb, 60 kg bomb. They're just not good vehicles overall, and this is really not the faction to be playing tanks as, at least not until the very, 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 very end of the tech tree. So while they're goofy and while they're kind of fun, we don't have any, like, you know, true mainline tanks that are going to be able to take on anything that the allies throw at you, and you're going to be relying a lot more on your anti-tank and your infantry to get the job done and to win matches. Now, for Tier 2, the first unlock that we're going to want to grab is definitely the MP28. The reason for this is that we're going to get Assaulter 2s, and the MP28 is an okay gun, but then we're going to be able to move on to the Type 2A. Now, these guns, I personally think the Type 2A is a much better weapon than the MP28, but, you know, you can use either one. The MP28 has the big upside of having a 50-round magazine, which means it's great for just trench sweeping or clearing out big packs of enemies and things like that, but it has a very low rate of fire and low damage. And the Type 2A SMG, while similarly has low damage, it has much higher rate of fire, giving it higher DPS for winning gunfights. So this really comes down to your, again, personal preference. I like the Type 2A, but there's nothing wrong with going with the MP28. The important thing here, guys, is we want to get our Assaulter 2 squad, because our Assaulter 2 squad is going to give us access to a better overall assault squad as compared to the medic squad. The assaulters can bring anti-tank weapons, they can bring an engineer, they can bring you know, a sniper or something like that. So they're just a much better class and a much better overall squad in general. Now, as for the rest of the tech tree, I recommend coming down to our heavy weapons, grabbing the Type 5 rocket launcher. Once you have this, you can use this for the rest of the game, at least at the time of this video. We'll see if they add more anti-tank weapons for the Japanese, but the Type 5 has 100 armor pin, making it incredibly good. And while it takes a little bit to get used to with its, you know, you're being forced to hip fire with it, it is a fantastic anti-tank weapon, and you'll be able to take on basically any tank that the allies throw at you for the rest of the game, honestly, for the rest of the BRs. So great and useful thing there. And then the next we have, of course, our APC squad. Always a good squad to bring and to have, even if you aren't necessarily utilizing it all the time. It's just a good squad to have in your back pocket, because if you don't want to bring an engineer squad, or maybe you instead want to just build rally points with your assault squads or something like that, then APC is a great alternate choice to the engineer squad, because it will allow you to, you know, have that mobile spawner for your team, which can be very, very powerful. And having both a rally point and an APC up will drastically increase your chances of winning games in Enlisted. After that, we have the Type 4 rocket launcher and a anti-tank squad 2. Anti-tank gunner 2s are not, you know, that useful. You know, they have some nice perk points, and they can be a decent upgrade if you want to go that route. The Type 4 rocket launcher itself isn't really that much better. It actually has less armor pin than the Type 5, but it has the added benefit of actually being able to be aimed. Take that how you will. I personally think the Type 5 is more than good enough and is easy to aim once you get the hang of it, so I always stick with the Type 5. But if you find yourself struggling, Type 4 is going to be fine. Just keep in mind that there's going to be vehicles that you're going to run into that you won't be able to pin with the Type 4 that you can pin with the Type 5. As for our mainline rifles, nothing up here is worth picking up. The Type 99 rifle and both Type 99 rifle versions, the late and the early, are worse than the Type 38 that we already have. And the Type 38 with a grenade launcher isn't really worth using either, because it's going to up tier us to BR3. If you want to use this when you unlock it in BR3 rather than standard Type 38, that's fine, but don't use it in BR2, or at least not yet, right? We want to get to tier 3 and get BR3 weapons before going into that. As for our vehicles, we again have nothing special. The Ho-I, yes, is kind of it's our first real mainline tank with a nice 50 millimeters on the front. So it can, you know, it can fight stuff. It's definitely a decent vehicle, but it's still going to be taken out by things like Shermans. And the Honi Eye, while having a nice cannon, is an open top vehicle and will end up getting killed by basically anything that sneezes on it, which is going to be, again, a recurring theme with the Japanese. As for planes, we don't have too much here. We have a nice D3A1, which does have a 250 kg bomb, which is nice. This thing operates almost kind of like a Stuka. So if you wanted to go do some dive bombing with this, that's perfectly fine. And we, of course, unlock the legendary Zero, the A6M2 Ryzen, which is going to be, in my opinion, the plane you should be using for quite some time, at least until BR4 as your mainline fighter. This thing can outturn basically anything in the game. It is very, very good at turn fighting. It isn't very fast, but it can turn very quickly. So you want to make sure to get in those turn engagements, which really kind of, that's how most of Enlisted ends up playing, at least in dogfights. There's not a lot of, quote unquote, high level dogfights the way that you might see in something like War Thunder. So the Ryzen ends up being a very dominant air superiority fighter in the game. I just realized that I forgot to mention gunners for BR2. The machine guns in BR2 across all factions are pretty lackluster, and Japan is no exception to this. The Type 11 LMG is really not that good. I personally really dislike using the weapon. It just feels awkward. The Type 97 is marginally better and has a kind of goofy scope on it, which is neat. But at the end of the day, it still has a 20-round magazine, and this isn't really what machine guns want to do, at least not in Enlisted. The game just doesn't quite play the way that you would want it to have a machine gun with the scope really work. It is a decent thing to be using, and we do, at the end of the day, still want to level up our machine gun squad, so it is leveled up, and we can use it effectively when we get to Tier 3, which is where Japan gets some really solid LMGs. Onwards and upwards to Tier 3. Now, I really like Tier 3 for Japan. I think it has a very strong BR3. Due largely in part to its very strong SMG lineup, as well as, of course, its strong LMG lineup. Its rifles are starting to fall off. You can still use the Type 38 rifle and it's fine, but the Type High rifle is very lackluster. Some people, for some reason, like this gun. I don't know why. It is a BR2 weapon as opposed to BR3, and I guess you could be using the Type Otsu rifle, which is, unlocked later in Tier 4, but is a battle rating 3. But even still, they're 5-round magazines, and they don't do enough damage to justify having that small of a magazine. So in my opinion, guys, just use the bolt action Type 38 rifle and do as much damage with those as you can, while primarily getting the job done using weapons like the Type 100 SMG late, which is an absolutely monstrous gun. High rate of fire, solid damage, good stats for controlling the recoil, just an overall amazing weapon. It's what I recommend you guys use. Arguably, it's the best SMG at its BR, and for Japan as a whole. There's an argument to be made later on about the Tokyo Arsenal we'll talk about, but the Type 100 SMG late is an incredibly powerful SMG. Very, very good, and I recommend you guys bring as many of these as you can. As for LMGs, we also get the Type 96 and the Type 99 LMG. The Type 99 is kind of just a better Type 96, right? It kind of just fires faster, and they have very similar stats, so I always recommend going with the Type 99. Very, very good gun. But in my opinion, guys, the best LMG is actually the KE7. Those of you that are familiar with my channel know how much I love the BAR, and the KE7 is basically just a better version of the BAR. It feels like a BAR, it plays like a BAR, it's just got 5 more rounds than a BAR, which makes it really, really good. So I highly recommend you guys use the KE7. Kind of use it as a pseudo assaulter style weapon. If you want to use a more traditional LMG, there's nothing wrong with the Type 99, but I personally think that the KE7 is the way to go and is the most effective way of playing as the Japanese. Now, of course, you also unlock things like the Type 93 flamethrower, but I recommend holding off on flamethrowers until you unlock the Type 100, the Tier 2 version of the flamethrower. Much more powerful, much better overall. And we also have to mention an important thing that we unlock. I think you actually unlock them in Tier 2, but we're going to put them in Tier 3. We unlock katanas and anti-tank lunge mines. Now, Japan is unique in the fact that no other faction has access to swords, allowing Japan to outfit all of their soldiers with glorious, 1,000 times folded katanas, which really is useful because katanas have the highest move speed
of any item in the game. I think event swords actually have slightly higher, but the katanas that you can buy have very high move speed, allowing you to get to the fights just a little bit quicker than any other faction in the game, which is very useful for maps and game modes like confrontation. So you can really zip around the map using those katanas, and of course you can always charge into battle. You have longer range with the katana than most enemies. You can always swing faster. If you can even go for a crazy kind of katana style build with a lot of sprint speed and melee attack speed, and just go in, hack it, and slash, and it can be a lot of fun to do that. Japan also has the anti-tank lunge mine, which is unique to Japan as a faction. This thing has monstrous pen, but obviously has the downside of being a stick with a mine on the end of it, which not only is going to probably kill you, but is also just very difficult to use in the first place. But if you are able to get to the side of an enemy vehicle and you're able to schwack that vehicle with the anti-tank lunge mine, you'll more than likely be able to detonate the ammo rack and do a ton of damage, if not just outright kill the enemy vehicle itself. So you can always outfit those on your soldiers and pick them up in various spots on the maps. They're very useful, they're very good, and it's good to have them on a lot of your soldiers as a backup. As for vehicles, we of course have the Ho Ni 3. This basically is very similar to the Ho Ni 1 that we have in tier 2, except it is closed as opposed to being an open top. Pretty nice, we like to see that. Very cool. Still, basically it's made of paper. It's paper mache, and it gets killed by basically anything. So it's a glass cannon, just like most Japanese tanks are. We also get the Chiha shotgun, which again, glass cannon, but this time at least has the benefit of being genuinely hilarious. They basically took a 120mm naval howitzer gun and slapped it onto a tank, and it does exactly what it sounds like it'll do. It will just pop tanks open like tin cans. The concussive force from that HE shell will just blast people apart. It's a very fun tank to use, and I recommend you guys do use it. As for planes, we really don't unlock anything worth mentioning. Yes, the B5N2 is decent, but it is an attack plane. It has no frontal armament, which means you're going to get eaten alive by anyone who really wants to kill you. If you want to be using planes, it is an upgrade from the D3A1. But it's not one that is so substantial that it's really that important to mention. You'll kind of just get dominated in the air. A lot of allied players are constantly flying, and this thing is basically just food for the P-51s, the P-47s, or the P-38s that are constantly flying around.
Tier 4, we of course have our Type Otsu rifle and the Type 4 rifle. Type Otsu rifle, in my opinion, is not worth picking up. It's just a small upgrade from the Type High rifle, and you're still better off using the Type 38 bolt action. Type 4, however, if you do want to use it, you can. This basically is an M1 Garand copy, and while I personally don't like using this thing, and I still use the Type 38 rifle even at Tier 4, there's nothing that says you can't use this, and equipping an engineer squad with this is not a bad choice in any way, shape, or form. So go ahead and grab that if you want a little bit more firepower on your engineer squads to be a little bit more aggressive. As for our assault squads, we have the Type 2 SMG and the Tokyo Arsenal SMG. Type 2 is nothing really to write home about. I think the Type 100 is better in basically every single capacity, so it's pretty safe to ignore that. However, you do get Assaulter 3s, which is nice. The Tokyo Arsenal SMG, however, is a nice upgrade, and it is something that you can use. It does have 1200 rate of fire, meaning it has absolutely redonkulous DPS, putting it on par with something like a PPSH. However, I still personally don't like using this nearly as much as I like using the Type 100 SMG, rather, because the Tokyo just runs through its ammo so fast that it can be difficult to actually take down a lot of enemies if they aren't super grouped up. So I think the Type 100 SMG is kind of sitting in that area of perfect SMG and just a really solid weapon overall. Nothing wrong with using the Tokyo. It's a good gun. It's a fun gun. But I just personally would recommend using the Type 100 SMG over it. Flamethrowers, Type 100 flamethrower. It's just a better flamethrower. If you want to use it, go for it. But personally, I don't like using it. I would still be rocking our standard assaulter, maybe a gunner squad, and an engineer squad. Depending if you want to still bring a gunner squad or not, right? You can bring that gunner squad with the KE7 at this BR and do fine. Or you can choose to bring a second assault squad over that and have the Tokyo Arsenal or a Type 100. Moving on to our tanks, we finally get the Chi Nu, which is a fantastic little tank. I love using the Chi-Nu, especially if you bring it down to BR3. It's a good tank. Still kind of starts matching Sherman's at this BR, but it's still not really that good. We also unlocked the NATO, which is, man, this thing is a glass cannon. It's the definition of a glass cannon, okay? It has a big crew, but you can be sniped out of the gunner seat of this thing, which means you have to play very far back. And on top of that, it doesn't really come with that much ammo, so you need to be really careful when you use this. If anybody even sneezes on you, you'll just instantly die. If you get marked by an enemy and a plane dives you, you will instantly die because it has 12 armor. Not a great vehicle. You can, however, use the Cheeto at BR5, and the Cheeto is fantastic for taking on enemy vehicles. It's the first tank that the Japanese has that can really go toe-to-toe with American counterparts. This thing can fight 76 Shermans. It can fight Fireflies, things like that. It'll lose to a Jumbo, but it can still fight, right? It can still do okay against a lot of the allied tanks. As for planes, we get the D4Y1 with the 500 kg bomb, big nuclear bomb dropping on people if you want to do that. I don't personally recommend doing that. I just don't think it's useful. A lot of the Japanese planes, you got to be taken off from carriers and things like that, so it's just not that useful. But we do get the Ki-61-2 Otsukai, which is a great plane. You're going to have to be dealing with lots and lots and lots of allied planes, P-47s, Corsairs, P-38s all the time, and this plane takes them all on and takes them to, I don't know, they take them out to dinner, I guess. They munch them, all right? They absolutely rinse them. They're fantastic. I love this plane, and it only gets better whenever we unlock the better version of it, the Ki-84, later on in Tier 5. So, T-61, great plane. Highly recommend you guys bring this over anything else because you just have to fight enemy planes. The allies are going to be bombing you relentlessly, so to farm and to protect your team, bringing a fighter plane is going to be an absolute must. Now let's hit our last BR and Tier 5. Tier 5 is where Japan really, really shines. We've kind of been average, or at least, on par or slightly below par with the allies up to this point, and now we are absolutely going to be slaughtering them. We get the Type High automatic rifle, which is a fantastic weapon. Basically a Fedorov if you guys play as the Soviets, but as an infantry weapon. This thing is incredible. Does great damage, very controllable. It's got a bipod. It's just incredible, right? It's got a bayonet even to boot, so you can stab people. Fantastic weapon, 30-round mag. Not a whole lot more you can ask for. The T-20 does exist and takes this thing on, but the Type High is more than good enough for dealing with the allies. So you're going to want to immediately max out and grab as many Type High automatic rifles as you can and get them on as many infantry soldiers as you possibly can. We also unlocked the Type 100 MG. The Type 100 MG is fantastic, but at the end of the day, I don't like this gun that much, and I prefer using the KE7 just because while this gun does spit out tons of ammo, and I love that it has this anti-air sight that makes it very easy to see enemy targets, it just has so much dispersion on it that even when you're bipoded down, it's just impossible to really hit anything at range, which is where you kind of want to be using this thing because you're so slow while carrying it. So while you can do a lot of damage and absolutely just destroy entire squads with this thing, I personally just like using the KE7 more. But don't be afraid to use this thing. Don't be afraid to try it out, test it out, and see if you like it. Then for our vehicles, because we have very little unlocks in terms of infantry weapons, we get the Ho-Ri Production. Now, this is arguably the best tank in the entire game. This thing is absolutely nuts. This thing will be able to take on anything that the allies throw at it, including the Pershing. With amazing frontal armor and amazing cannon, you'll be able to just absolutely destroy anyone. The only downsides of this vehicle is that whenever you look up, your infantry or your tank crewmen will actually leave the vehicle. They'll like pop out of these little hatches, which make them very easy to get bombed and killed by infantry that are nearby. It's very, very, very annoying. So it's something that you kind of got to watch out for. Don't let your infantry or your crew get killed by that. And on top of that, it's also just really awkward to use, generally speaking, on a lot of Pacific maps. But at the end of the day, this thing is absolutely fantastic. Very, very good tank, and will be able to take on anything that the allies throw at you. The J2M3 plane can be pretty safely ignored. I don't like this plane. I don't see why you would use it. It is an interceptor in a game that interceptors don't really matter, right? It's got great climb speed, but we don't really care about climb speed because we start with an air spawn anyway. Go ahead and ignore this plane. for the KI-84 which is what we really want to be using. It gets a pair of 250 kg bombs, gets some nice cannons, some nice 50 cals on it. It's just an upgrade over the Otsukai. It's going to be able to do everything the Otsukai could do, except better. You should be able to take on, P-51s. You should be able to take on the Corsairs. You should be able to take on P-38s. You're going to be able to do just fine in the Ki-84, and you're going to be able to farm a lot of enemy vehicles and finish out the rest of your tree. That, guys, it. That's the Japanese tech tree in a nutshell. Keep in mind, we will be doing, of course, breakdowns showing the exact gear setup and the exact squads for each tier, but hopefully this guide gave you guys a brief overview of everything that you could be using and the best stuff in each tier for the Japanese. Let me know how I did in the comments below, and while you're there, make sure to like and subscribe. I do appreciate it. It does help me out. And remember also to come follow me over at twitch.tv/aquadro, where I am going to be streaming a little bit more often in the near future. So make sure you guys come and hang out over there, play some Deadlock, play some Enlisted with me. Be a good time. Without anything else, guys, thanks again for watching. I'll see you next time. Take it easy.